An arrogant millionaire watches his life fall apart after a reckless decision at sea. But when all seems lost, an unlikely reunion changes everyone's fate in a way no one could have predicted. The golden sunlight of Miami poured over the Thompson mansion, as if it were yet another exclusive privilege of this family. In the spacious garden of the Palm Beach property, Blake stretched out on a lounger, dark sunglasses covering his green eyes and a satisfied smile on his lips. At 28, he was the embodiment of what the society columns called a problematic heir, handsome, rich, and completely unconcerned with the consequences of his actions. "Son, we need to talk about tomorrow's board meeting," announced Gregory. Thompson crossing the garden with firm steps, his impeccable suit unmoved despite the intense heat. Blake rolled his eyes behind his dark glasses. "Dad, it's Saturday. I have plans. That party on Richard's yacht?" Gregory took a deep breath, controlling the impatience that always arose during these conversations. "Blake, this isn't a request. The bank is going through a delicate moment, and you, as the heir, need to start taking on responsibilities." The young man rose from the lounger with a sudden movement, running his hand through his perfectly disheveled hair. "Responsibilities?" He laughed ironically. "I was born to enjoy what we've built, Dad. Crisis management isn't my thing." Without waiting for a response, he walked to the pool where his newly acquired Italian motorcycle gleamed under the sun. Gregory watched his son with a mixture of frustration and concern. "Someday you'll need to face reality, Blake. Not everything can be solved with money." But the young man was already far away, the roar of his motorcycle echoing against the mansion. Walls. At the exclusive Wellington Equestrian Club, Blake parked among luxury cars. The place was buzzing with Miami's elite gathered for the preparatory training for the Grand American Stakes, the most prestigious horse race in the country. As he walked through the complex with the confidence of someone who owns the place, he greeted acquaintances with casual nods. "Thompson, thought you'd be in Paris this week," commented Logan Mitchell, heir to a construction company and party friend. "Changed my mind." "Heard about an unmissable opportunity here," he replied, his eyes fixed on the track where thoroughbreds were being exercised. "I bet it's related to the Grand Stakes. Betting big this year." Blake smiled slyly, enigmatic. "I'm going to do more than that." At that moment, his attention was captured by an imposing figure crossing the track at impressive speed. A black thoroughbred, lustrous mane flying in the wind, defined muscles under the shining coat. The elegance of the animal was almost hypnotic. "Who's that?" he asked, unable to take his eyes off the horse. "Thunder. He's the great promise from Silverwood Stables. They say he has the best lineage of the last 10 years, untamable, but fast. As Thunder." Something awakened in Blake's gaze. It wasn't admiration but covetousness. That animal would be the perfect symbol for his triumphant entry into the racing world. Not as a gambler, but as an owner. He could already imagine the headlines, the photos, the prestige that a champion would bring. "How much?" he asked simply. Logan laughed nervously. "Blake, it's not that simple. The stables don't want to sell Thunder. Old Art has raised him since he was a foal, has plans for him beyond racing. He's practically family." Blake stared at his friend with a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone has a price, Logan. Absolutely everyone." As he watched the magnificent animal complete another lap, Blake was already mentally elaborating his next acquisition. Not as a horse lover or sport connoisseur, but as someone who saw Thunder merely as another object of ostentation, a living trophy that would prove once again that a Thompson always gets what he wants. What he didn't know was that this desire would transform his life in ways he could never imagine. Silverwood Stables was an hour from Miami, in a valley surrounded by verdant mountains. When Blake's imported car parked at the stone entrance, a cloud of dust rose, contrasting with the elegance of the vehicle. He stepped out, adjusting his sunglasses, as if the world should adapt to his presence, not the other way around. Arthur observed the scene from the porch of the main house, a 60-year-old man whose sun-marked face held the wisdom of someone who had dedicated his life to horses. Next to him, Melissa, his 27-year-old granddaughter, frowned. "Isn't that the banker's son? The one who appears in the tabloids every week?" she asked, crossing her arms over her veterinary coat. "Yes, girl, and by the look of him, he didn't. Come here to admire the roses," replied Arthur, sighing. "Better go see what he wants." Blake's walk through the stables more resembled a parade, looking around with a mixture of disdain and calculated curiosity. When Arthur approached, he opened, a rehearsed smile. "Mr. Thompson, what a surprise. How can I help you?" asked the handler without extending his hand. "I'll get straight to the point. I want to buy Thunder," declared Blake, removing his glasses to face the older man. "Name your price." Arthur laughed, a dry laugh that contained no humor. "Thunder isn't for sale, Mr. Thompson. We've worked with him since birth. We have specific plans for his development." Blake took a checkbook from his Italian suit pocket. "Every animal has a price, Mr. Arthur, and I'm willing to pay well above market value." He paused studiously. "Far above." Arthur pointed to one of the stables. "Come meet him before talking prices. Maybe then you'll understand why he's different." Reluctantly, Blake followed the man, annoyed by the dust staining his Italian shoes. Upon reaching the stall, the young millionaire stopped, genuinely impressed. Thunder was even more imposing up close, tall, muscular, with a black coat that reflected light like polished obsidian. The animal stared at them with an unsettling intelligence in his dark eyes. "He's 4 years old, a direct descendant of international champions," explained Arthur, approaching to caress the horse's muzzle, which responded with a soft neigh. "But it's not just pedigree. There's something about him. An understanding, a will of his own. Thunder chooses to run, you understand? It's not something we can force." Blake rolled his eyes, impatient. "Poetic, but he's still a horse, and one that's going to win me the Grand Stakes trophy." It was at this moment that Melissa approached, her firm gaze fixed on Blake. "A horse isn't a sports car, Mr. Thompson. You can't simply buy it and expect it to work perfectly without understanding how to care for it." Blake examined her from top to bottom, noticing for the first time the young woman with brown hair tied in a messy ponytail and determined eyes. "And you would be?" "Melissa Sanders, equine veterinarian and Arthur's granddaughter, and I know Thunder better than anyone." Something in her challenging tone piqued Blake's interest, who smiled with calculated charm. "Then perhaps you could come in the package, Dr. Sanders, to ensure my investment is well cared for." Her face hardened. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Thompson, and I suggest you look for another animal. Thunder wouldn't be happy with someone who sees him merely as a trophy." Ignoring the growing tension, Blake turned to Arthur, writing a figure on his checkbook that made the old handler pale. "This is my final offer. Think carefully. An amount like this doesn't come around twice in a lifetime." Arthur looked at the paper, then at the horse, then at his granddaughter. His stables were facing financial difficulties that few knew about. That sum would solve all problems, secure the future of the property and all the other animals. But selling Thunder was like selling a piece of the soul of the place. "I need time to think," he finally said. Blake smiled, satisfied. Time meant negotiation, and negotiation meant victory. "I'll be waiting for your call until tomorrow. After that, my interest may wane," he warned, walking back to his car. When he left, Melissa faced her grandfather with concern. "Grandpa, you're not seriously considering this, are you?" Arthur stroked Thunder, his tired eyes reflecting a deep dilemma. "Sometimes we need to make difficult choices for the greater good, girl. This place supports 15 families and more than 30 animals." Melissa approached Thunder, hugging his strong neck. "But he won't know how to care for him. You saw how he looks at Thunder? Like he's just an object." Arthur didn't respond, his thoughts as heavy as the clouds beginning to form on the horizon, announcing a storm that wasn't just climatic. 3 weeks had passed since Thunder was transferred to the luxurious facilities of the Wellington Equestrian Club. The check with many zeros had finally convinced Arthur, who with a heavy heart accepted Blake's offer. The condition imposed by the old handler was that he himself would supervise the animal's adaptation period. News of the acquisition spread quickly among Miami's elite. "Thompson Heir invests millions in potential champion," headlined the society columns. Blake delighted in the attention, showing off his newest toy to the press and selected friends. "The Grand Stakes is in 2 months," commented Blake, watching from a distance as Arthur worked with Thunder in the paddock. "We need to intensify the training." The old handler stopped the exercise, approaching the fence where Blake was watching. "Mr. Thompson, we've already discussed this. Thunder needs a specific training program. Forcing the pace now could compromise his performance in the race." Blake drummed his fingers on the wooden fence, impatient. 2 months is little time, Arthur. I want visible results in 2 weeks. Further away, Melissa observed the scene with apprehension. She had secured a position as a veterinarian at the Wellington Equestrian Club, not by coincidence. Her concern for Thunder had led her to stay nearby, even if it meant living with Blake Thompson. "He's not going to change his mind, is he?" she asked Arthur when he returned to the stable. The old man sighed, removing Thunder's saddle. "People like him don't know limits, girl. He thinks the world works on his schedule." Melissa stroked Thunder's lustrous coat, noticing how the animal seemed restless in his new environment. "He's stressed, Grandpa. I've never seen him like this. He feels the pressure. Animals perceive people's intentions," replied Arthur, with the wisdom of decades handling horses. "And his new owner's intentions aren't the best." The conversation was interrupted by Blake's arrival, accompanied by a severe-looking man. "This is Ryan Carter, the best trainer in the country," announced Blake with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "He'll be taking over Thunder's training starting tomorrow." Arthur dropped the brush he was using on the straw floor. "What? Our agreement was that I would supervise the entire process until the race." Blake shrugged, indifferent. "I changed my mind. Your methods are too slow for my taste. Ryan guaranteed he can prepare Thunder in record time." The trainer approached, evaluating the horse with clinical eyes. "Fine specimen. With the right regime, he'll be unbeatable." Melissa stepped forward, indignation evident on her face. "Right regime? What does that mean exactly?" Ryan smiled condescendingly. "More intense training, discipline, and some special supplements I've developed. Perfectly legal, of course." Arthur shook his head, categorical. "Not with Thunder. He won't handle that kind of pressure." Blake faced the old handler coldly. "Thunder isn't yours anymore, Arthur. I appreciate your dedication, but your services are no longer needed." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Arthur slowly removed his hat, approached Thunder, and whispered something in his ear. The animal neighed softly, as if understanding every word. "You'll regret this, young man," Arthur finally said, addressing Blake. "Not because of me, but because of what you'll do to this animal." Melissa watched her grandfather leave, feeling a lump in her throat. She turned to Blake, her voice trembling with contained anger. "You have no idea what you're doing." Blake advanced, standing dangerously close to her. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Building a champion. And you, Dr. Sanders, have 2 options. Collaborate with the new method, or follow your grandfather out the door." Her eyes shone with determination. "I'll stay. Someone needs to ensure Thunder survives your methods." A victorious smile appeared on Blake's lips. "I knew you were more sensible than your grandfather. See you tomorrow at 5 in the morning. Training starts early." When she was alone in the stable, Melissa hugged Thunder's strong neck, who seemed agitated after Arthur's departure. "I'll take care of you," she promised, her voice choked. "I won't let him hurt you." That night, a violent storm fell over Miami. In the comfort of his penthouse, Blake watched the lightning cut through the dark sky, a glass of whiskey in hand and ambitious plans in mind. At the Equestrian Club, Melissa remained beside Thunder, who was startled by the thunder, and in his simple house on the outskirts of the city, Arthur looked out the window, with the premonition that worse storms were to come. The weeks dragged on under the new training regime. Outside, autumn painted Miami with golden tones, but inside the Equestrian Club facilities, the climate was one of growing tension. Thunder, once vigorous and proud, showed evident signs of wear. His coat, once shiny as black silk, was losing. Its luster and constant restlessness had replaced his confident posture. Melissa examined the animal's legs with evident concern, while Ryan, the new trainer, watched impatiently. "He's developing tendinitis," she diagnosed, gently passing her fingers over the horse's limb. "We need to reduce the intensity of training for at least 2 weeks." Ryan snorted, annoyed. Impossible. The grand stakes is in 3 weeks, and Mr. Thompson wants results. Melissa stood up, facing the trainer firmly. What Mr. Thompson wants doesn't matter to an animal's physiology. If we continue like this, Thunder won't be in any condition to even enter the track. The discussion was interrupted by Blake's arrival, accompanied by a group of friends. In recent days, it had become common for him to appear with his entourage, exhibiting his investment like someone showing off a newly acquired work of art. "How's our champion?" he asked, approaching the stall. His bloodshot eyes and too easy smile betrayed a night of excess that had extended into the morning. "We need to talk," said Melissa, trying to maintain a professional tone. "In private." Blake made a dismissive gesture for his friends to move away and faced the veterinarian with barely disguised irritation. "What is it now?" "Thunder is developing serious injuries. If we don't reduce the intensity of training, he could suffer permanent damage." A tense silence hung between them until Blake let out a dry laugh. "Dr. Sanders, I don't think you understand yet. I didn't buy Thunder for park strolls. He has a purpose, and we're going to achieve it. Even if it costs his health? Horses are investments. If they break, we replace them," he replied with a coldness that made Melissa step back. "You're monstrous." Blake moved closer, invading her personal space. "I'm practical, and you're here to ensure he crosses the finish line first, not to give me moral lessons." Melissa didn't back down this time. "I'm here for Thunder's welfare, and if you continue like this, I'll report animal abuse to the Breeders' Association." Blake's smile disappeared, replaced by a threatening expression. "Be careful with threats, Doctor. Your career could end with a single call from me." At this moment, Thunder neighed loudly, stamping his hooves on the stall floor with agitation, as if responding to the tension in the air. Blake turned to the animal with contempt. "See? Even he thinks you're overreacting." Melissa took a deep breath, changing tactics. "Look, I'm not asking you to give up the race, just to adjust the training. I can develop an alternative plan that won't hurt his chances but will preserve his health." Something in her tone seemed to reach a fraction of rationality in Blake. He considered for a moment before responding reluctantly. "You have 24 hours to present me with this plan. If you don't convince me, we continue as is." When he left, Melissa let out the air she hadn't realized she was holding. She approached Thunder, who seemed calmer with Blake's departure. "He doesn't understand, does he?" she whispered, caressing the animal's muzzle. "But we'll show him. We'll find a way." The next day, Melissa presented a detailed plan with graphs and scientific references. Blake feigned interest for 5 minutes before quickly scanning the pages and signing the last sheet. "Fine, try it your way. But the end result needs to be the same: victory." For 2 weeks, Melissa implemented her modified program. Thunder began to show signs of recovery, his eyes regaining that intelligent vivacity. She spent extra hours in the stable, massaging his muscles, applying compresses, and mainly rebuilding the animal's broken confidence. On a particularly hot afternoon, while working with Thunder in the paddock, she noticed Gregory Thompson, Blake's father, observing from a distance. The Thompson patriarch had an imposing posture, but his eyes demonstrated a thoughtful intelligence that his son lacked. "Impressive," he commented, approaching the fence. "I rarely see an animal respond like that to a trainer." Melissa blushed, slightly at the unexpected compliment. "I'm not a trainer, Mr. Thompson. I'm a veterinarian, and clearly understand more about horses than many trainers," he replied, watching attentively. "Does my son know the gem he has in his hands?" The question caught Melissa by surprise. She wasn't sure if he was referring to Thunder or to herself. "Your son sees Thunder as a trophy, not as a living being with limitations and his own personality." Gregory nodded, thoughtful. "Blake has always had difficulty recognizing limits, whether his own or others," he commented, more to himself than to Melissa. "Perhaps this horse has something to teach him." Before she could respond, Gregory said goodbye with a polite nod and left, leaving Melissa with the feeling that there was more to that visit than it appeared. What she didn't know was that same night, Blake would receive a call from Ryan with news that would change everything. One of his competitors had recorded impressive times in training. The victory that Blake considered guaranteed was threatened, and for a man accustomed to winning at any cost, this meant only one thing. It was time to return to the old methods, regardless of the consequences. The day of the Grand American Stakes dawned with a sky of impeccable blue over Miami. The stands of the Wellington Equestrian Club were already filling with elegant spectators, women with extravagant hats and men in expensive suits, all eager for the most prestigious event in national horse racing. In the VIP areas, champagne was served in crystal flutes, while million-dollar bets discreetly circulated among the guests. In the stables, the atmosphere was completely different. Melissa had arrived before dawn to find Thunder agitated with evident signs of discomfort. Her suspicions were confirmed when she discovered needle marks on his neck. "What did you give him?" she confronted Ryan as soon as the trainer appeared. The man averted his gaze, avoiding looking at her directly. "Just an energizer, perfectly legal." "Legal doesn't mean safe," she exploded, indignation overflowing in her voice. "You know he barely recovered from tendinitis." Ryan shrugged, indifferent to her concern. "Boss's orders. Today it's all or nothing." Before she could respond, Melissa saw Blake approaching. Impeccable in his navy blue suit, a silk handkerchief in his pocket matching his tie. His confident smile hid the anxiety that only his restless eyes betrayed. "How's our champion?" he asked, ignoring Melissa's furious expression. "You authorized injections without consulting me?" she questioned, her voice trembling with anger. Blake raised his eyebrows in fake surprise. "Dr. Sanders, I thought we had overcome this melodrama phase. Trust the professionals." "I am the professional here," she retorted, raising her voice. "Thunder is not in condition to race today. What you've given him only masks the pain, but the damage is still there." For an instant, something like doubt crossed Blake's face, quickly replaced by his usual arrogance. "It's just one race, he can handle it." "You're playing with his life," insisted Melissa, desperate. Blake moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I've invested millions in this animal. My reputation is at stake. He's going to race, Melissa, with or without your approval." The use of her first name, for the first time, didn't go unnoticed. It was an attempt at manipulation that only increased her disgust. "You'll regret this," she warned, with a somber certainty in her voice. Blake smiled, adjusting the gold watch on his wrist. "See you at the victory podium." The tension in the stable contrasted with the growing excitement outside. The stands were packed, and the announcer was already enthusiastically introducing the participants. In the Thompson family box, Gregory observed the movement with an unreadable expression, while Blake received premature congratulations from friends and associates. "They say your horse is the favorite," commented Richard, his playboy friend who never missed an opportunity to associate himself with others' success. Blake waved dismissively, as if victory was already certain. "Thunder is special. I recognized that from the first instant." "And that hot veterinarian who's always with him? Is she special too?" Provoked Richard with a malicious smile. Something about the comment bothered Blake more than it should have, but he just forced a laugh. "Too focused on her work for my taste, but she has her charm." An equestrian club assistant approached, informing that the horses were being led to the track. Blake quickly descended to the paddock, where he wanted to be photographed alongside Thunder before the race. Melissa observed from afar, her heart heavy. Thunder seemed restless, his gaze losing that characteristic shine as the handler prepared him. She tried to approach one last time. "Please check if he's okay during the race. At the slightest sign of discomfort, ask them to stop," she implored. "The jockey?" A thin young man with hard facial features. "Ma'am, we're here to win," he responded dryly. "Boss's orders." The horses were lined up at the starting gates. From the grandstand, Blake watched with outwardly unshakable confidence, though his hands were cold with sweat. The bets were placed, literally. A shot announced the start, and the gates opened simultaneously. Thunder shot forward with impressive initial speed, taking the lead in the first few meters. The crowd vibrated, and Blake felt pride swell in his chest. "See, pessimistic doctor?" he thought, mentally directing the provocation at Melissa. At the first curve, Thunder maintained the lead by almost an entire body length. His form was magnificent, muscles working in perfect harmony under the gleaming black coat. For a moment, it seemed Melissa was wrong, that the animal was born for this. It was on the opposite straight that the first signs appeared, imperceptible to most spectators, but clear to trained eyes. Thunder's stride, once fluid as water, became slightly irregular. The jockey noticed the change and responded with the only language he knew, more whip. In the stands, Melissa brought her hands to her mouth, horrified. Beside her, Arthur, who had come to watch despite everything, closed his eyes. "He won't." "Make it," murmured the old handler. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. At the final curve, when all horses were accelerating for the decisive sprint, Thunder lost his rhythm. His hind legs failed for a crucial instant, causing him to stumble violently. The jockey was thrown forward, while the magnificent animal fell heavily on the track, raising a cloud of dust. A horrified silence took over the stadium, followed by a growing murmur. Blake remained paralyzed, the champagne flute slipping from his fingers and shattering on the box floor. Below, on the track, a team of veterinarians ran to attend to Thunder, while the other competitors diverted and completed the race without its main favorite. Melissa was already on the track, running desperately toward the fallen animal. When she arrived, she pushed the others aside, kneeling beside Thunder's panting body. His intelligent eyes stared at her with what seemed a mixture of pain and accusation. Retrais continuar edit traduzindo história para contexto americano, focando em personagens. I'll continue the translation of the story, maintaining the same style and approach. I'm translating from Portuguese to American English, keeping the narrative flow while changing characters' names and locations to American settings. The story is about a wealthy, entitled young man who buys a racehorse as a trophy status symbol, mistreats it until it's injured in a race, and then undergoes a personal transformation through this experience. Let me continue from where I left off, which was the dramatic moment when Thunder collapsed during the race and Melissa rushed to his side. The meeting room of the American Thoroughbred Breeders Association was in absolute silence as the members of the disciplinary council faced Blake Thompson. The heir, always so confident, seemed smaller in that solitary chair, his face marked by deep, dark circles after a week of national scandal. "Mr. Thompson, the evidence is irrefutable," announced the council president, an austere man with graying hair. "The toxicology tests indicate the presence of prohibited substances in the animal system, along with clear signs of exploitation beyond acceptable physical limits." Blake ran his hand over his face, trying to maintain composure. "It was an error in judgment. I trusted the wrong people." "You are the owner. The ultimate responsibility is yours," replied the president. "This council unanimously decides to suspend your license for participation in official events for 3 years, in addition to a fine of $1 million, to be allocated to animal protection and recovery programs." Upon leaving the building, Blake was met by an avalanche of flashes and microphones. Journalists shouted questions, and animal protection activists held up protest signs. His driver tried to clear a path toward the bulletproof car, while his bodyguard kept reporters at a distance. "Mr. Thompson, how do you respond to accusations of animal cruelty? Is it true your father threatened to disinherit you after the scandal? What will be Thunder's fate after recovery?" Blake maintained an impassive face, his gaze fixed ahead, though internally, he felt a whirlwind of emotions he had never experienced before: humiliation, shame, and something deeper that he didn't yet know how to name. At Thompson Bank headquarters, Gregory watched coverage of the judgment on his tablet, his expression closed. His advisor waited, tense, for instructions. "Cancel tomorrow's press conference," the patriarch finally said. "And remove Blake's name from all institutional materials. He is temporarily relieved of his duties on the board." "Sir, the press will speculate." Let them speculate. This family has survived scandals for 3 generations. Gregory cut him off, ending the discussion. At Silverwood Stables, where Thunder had been transferred after the accident, Melissa worked tirelessly on the animal's rehabilitation. The injury to his hind leg was serious, but not irreversible as initially feared. With proper care, Thunder could recover completely, although his racing career was definitely over. Arthur observed his granddaughter, noticing the fatigue in her features. "You need to rest, girl. You've been here for 15 hours. Melissa pushed a sweaty strand of hair from her face. "I can't stop thinking I could have done more. I should have reported it earlier. Should have." Arthur placed his hand on her shoulder, gently interrupting her. "You did what you could. Now is the time to care, not to blame yourself." Their conversation was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of a car at the entrance to the stables. Both were surprised to see Blake Thompson get out of the vehicle, alone and without his usual entourage. He seemed different, not just because of the absence of his impeccable outfit, replaced by jeans and a simple t-shirt, but by something in his posture, less arrogant, almost hesitant. "What do you want here?" asked Melissa, protectively positioning herself in front of Thunder's stall. Blake stopped at a respectful distance, hands in his pockets, in an almost shy gesture that seemed completely alien to his personality. "I came to see how he's doing." "Now you care," she replied, the bitterness evident in her voice. Blake lowered his eyes, a gesture of submission that Melissa never imagined seeing from him. "I came to apologize, and to officially transfer Thunder's ownership to the stables. No conditions." Melissa and Arthur exchanged surprised looks. "Why?" asked Arthur, suspicious. Blake took a deep breath, as if the words were difficult to find. "Because you can give him what I never could, a home, not just a stable." Melissa studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, but found only an expression she had never seen there before: genuine shame. "This doesn't erase what happened," she said, still coldly. "No," Blake replied simply. "Nothing erases it." He took a step toward the stall but stopped when Thunder nervously backed away. The recognition of fear in the animal's eyes seemed to affect him more deeply than any words could. "He'll never trust me again, will he?" he asked, more to himself than to the others. "Broken trust isn't easily rebuilt, Mr. Thompson," replied Arthur. "Whether with animals or people." Blake nodded, swallowing hard. "The transfer documents are in the car, and there's a check for his recovery and, well, for whatever is necessary." "We don't want your money," Melissa said immediately. Blake faced her, the vulnerability in his gaze disconcerting. "It's not to buy forgiveness. It's the least I can do to repair a fraction of the damage." When he turned to leave, Melissa felt an unexpected pang of compassion. "He will recover," she said, her voice softer. "It will take time, but he's strong." Blake paused for a moment, without fully turning around. "Thank you for taking care of him better than I ever knew how," he responded, before walking toward his car. 3 months had passed since the incident at the Grand Stakes. Blake Thompson's life had completely transformed. The scandal, amplified by social media and the sensationalist press, had destroyed not only his reputation, but also his position in the family company. Gregory, after a tense meeting in the private office of the mansion, had been clear. Blake was temporarily removed from any executive function at the bank and would have his access to family funds limited until he learned the meaning of responsibility. The luxurious penthouse had been replaced by a smaller apartment, still in South Beach, but without the stunning view of the ocean. His party friends had evaporated almost instantly, as if failure were contagious. The doors of exclusive clubs, once thrown wide open at his presence, now discreetly closed. Blake Thompson, Miami's Golden Prince, had become persona non grata in the circles he once dominated. On a Sunday afternoon, he walked alone along the shore, something unthinkable in his previous life, always surrounded by people. Wearing dark glasses and a cap to avoid recognition, he observed families playing in the sand, couples holding hands, groups of friends sharing beers and laughter. Everyday scenes of a normality that had never been part of his existence. His cell phone vibrated in his pocket. It was Gregory, a rarity these days. "Can we meet for dinner tonight?" His father's voice sounded strangely conciliatory. Blake hesitated before answering affirmatively. Since the fiasco, his interactions with the patriarch had been minimal and strictly formal. What could have changed? The restaurant chosen by Gregory was discreet, a traditional Italian establishment frequented more by families than celebrities. A place where they could talk without the risk of unwanted photos or curious ears. "You look better," commented Gregory after initial greetings, studying his son with clinical attention. Blake shrugged, uncomfortable under paternal scrutiny. "Better is relative when you've hit rock bottom." Gregory poured wine for both, an unusual gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Blake. "This scandal," began his father, carefully choosing his words, "was the worst moment of your life, but perhaps it was necessary." Blake raised his eyes, surprised by the direction of the conversation. "Necessary? I lost everything, Dad. My position, my friends, my reputation." "You lost an artificial life," corrected Gregory, with a firmness tempered by something resembling compassion. "Those weren't friends, Blake. They were parasites attracted by your money and status. The real loss would be to continue on that path until you destroyed yourself and everything around you." The words hit Blake with unexpected force. There was truth in them, a truth he had begun to glimpse in the long, sleepless nights of recent months. "You didn't bring me here just to philosophize about my life choices," he commented, defensive. "What do you really want, Dad?" Gregory rested, his elbows on the table, leaning slightly. "I want to offer you a second chance. Not at the bank, not yet. Something different." He then explained that the family owned land in rural Kentucky, a farm managed from a distance for years. The administrator was retiring, and Gregory proposed that Blake take over the property, away from the spotlight of Miami. "Why?" asked Blake, suspicious. "Is it a punishment or an exile?" "Neither," replied Gregory, with a rare sincerity between them. "It's an opportunity for reconstruction, away from the temptations and pressures that have always surrounded you." Blake remained silent, turning the wine glass between his fingers as he considered the proposal. Part of him wanted to refuse immediately, to see it as just another humiliation. But another part, one that seemed to be slowly awakening in recent months, recognized the wisdom in his father's words. "I'll think about it," he finally replied without committing. Upon returning to his apartment, Blake found his social media flooded with unusual notifications. The hashtag #AskJusticeForThunder had returned to trending after the release of new photos of the animal recovering at Silverwood Stables. One showed Melissa smiling beside the horse, whose coat had returned to shining with health. Feeling a pang in his chest that he couldn't completely identify, he touched the screen, enlarging the image. Thunder looked different, not just physically recovered, but with a sparkle in his eyes that Blake had never seen during the brief period when he was his owner. The animal seemed happy. Scrolling to the comments, Blake was confronted with the reality of public opinion about him. The words were harsh, some cruel, most justifiably indignant. However, among the negative comments, he found an unexpected message. "Thunder is recovering surprisingly well. The psychological trauma is taking longer than the physical, but he is resilient." The anonymous donation greatly helped in purchasing physiotherapy equipment. Melissa Sanders. Blake knew that Melissa had discovered the origin of the anonymous donation, but had chosen not to expose him. It was a small gesture, but significant. For an instant, he felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. That night, looking out the window at the city he had once considered his personal empire, Blake made a decision. Perhaps his father was right. Perhaps it was time to start over in a different place, away from everything he had been, away from the young man he himself hated to look at in the mirror. Willow Creek Farm was located 4 hours from Lexington, in a mountainous region where the air was clean and the silence had an almost tangible quality. When Blake's Jeep traveled the dirt road to the main house, he was greeted by a stone and wood construction, rustic but welcoming, surrounded by verdant hills and a sky of a blue that seemed unreal after so many years breathing Miami's pollution. Jack, the former administrator, a 70-year-old man with sun-tanned skin, waited on the porch. Beside him, a caramel-colored dog of undefined breed wagged its tail with carefree animation. "You must be Dr. Gregory's son," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Welcome to Willow Creek." Blake shook the man's hand, noticing the surprising strength in those aged fingers. "Just Blake, please." The first days were a culture shock. Accustomed to asking and being served instantly, Blake now faced the reality of rural life where every comfort depended on direct work. The internet was unstable, the cell phone signal almost non-existent in many areas of the property, and the closest luxury was a small town 40 minutes away. Jack, patient but firm, began to introduce him to the farm's routine. The property, in addition to the main house, had facilities for dairy cattle breeding, a small coffee plantation, and a preserved forest area. 15 employees, most living in houses on the property, kept everything running. Have you ever worked with animals before?" asked Jack as they walked through the stable area. Blake hesitated, Thunder's name immediately coming to mind. "Not in the right way," he finally answered, with an honesty that surprised even himself. The old administrator nodded, with no judgment in his gaze. "Then we start with the basics. Here, those who don't understand animals don't understand life." Weeks turned into months. Blake's body, previously shaped only by luxury gyms, now gained calluses and muscles forged by real work. The Kentucky sun marked his skin with a tan different from that acquired on the beaches of South Beach. Deeper, less uniform, telling the story of days spent under the open sky. One afternoon, while helping with milking, something he would never have imagined doing in his previous life, Blake noticed one of the newborn calves separated from the others, shivering slightly. "Something's wrong with that one," he commented to Mrs. Ellen, the robust woman who supervised the process. She approached, examining the calf with experienced eyes. "Feverish," she diagnosed. "I'll call the vet, but it'll take a couple of hours for him to get here from town." "What can we do in the meantime?" asked Blake, surprised by his own concern. Mrs. Ellen looked at him for a moment, as if evaluating something. "Let's take him to a warmer place. We need to hydrate and observe." During the following hours, Blake remained beside the calf, following Mrs. Ellen's instructions to keep the animal hydrated and comfortable. When the veterinarian finally arrived and administered the necessary medications, he felt a disproportionately intense relief upon hearing that the calf would recover. "You have a knack for this," commented the veterinarian, a middle-aged man named Dr. Wilson. "Many owners wouldn't even show up in the stable." "I'm not like most owners," replied Blake without elaborating. As the months passed, Blake's transformation went beyond the physical. The sleepless nights filled with regrets began to give way to deep sleep, the result of the honest fatigue of daily work. The nightmares of thunder falling on the track still appeared occasionally, but with less frequency. On a particularly clear morning, Blake found Jack on the porch watching the sunrise with a steaming cup of coffee. "Have you decided what to do with the north pasture?" asked the old man. Blake nodded, sitting beside him. "We're going to convert part of it to organic agriculture. I've already talked with Dr. Wilson about the best options for the soil here." Jack smiled, satisfied. "Your father won't like it. It gives less immediate profit than cattle." "My father gave me autonomy to make decisions here," replied Blake with a new confidence in his voice, "and long-term sustainability is more important than quick profit." The administrator studied him for a moment, with that look that seemed to see beyond words. "You know, when you arrived, I gave you 6 months before you'd give up and run back to the big city," confessed the old man with a frank smile. "I've never been so happy to be wrong." That night, alone in his simple but comfortable room, Blake opened his laptop for a rare email check. Among administrative messages and some social media notifications that interested him less and less, one name caught his attention: Melissa Sanders. With his heart racing in a way he hadn't felt in a long time, he opened the message. "Blake, I hope this message finds you well. You might be surprised to hear from me, but I felt I should share this. Thunder is completely recovered, not just physically but emotionally. Arthur says he's never seen him so serene. We've started an equine therapy program for children with special needs, and surprisingly, Thunder has been the most receptive horse. It's as if he understands their fragility. I've attached some photos in case you'd like to see. Melissa. The photos showed Thunder in an open field, his black coat gleaming in the sun, and several with children gently mounted on his back, their faces illuminated by pure smiles. In each image, the horse seemed completely at peace, his eyes conveying a serenity that Blake had never seen during the time he was his owner. That animal that he had treated as an object, as a means to personal glory, was now transforming lives. With slightly trembling fingers, Blake began to write a response, erasing and restarting several times until he found the right words. 1 year had passed since Blake's move to Willow Creek Farm. What had begun as a forced exile had transformed into a journey of self-discovery that even he couldn't have imagined possible. The property under his management flourished in unexpected ways. The organic agriculture project, initially viewed with skepticism by many employees, now bore literal and metaphorical fruits, with the farm's specialty coffee production beginning to gain recognition at regional fairs. On a Saturday afternoon, Blake received an unexpected visit from his father. Gregory Thompson, always impeccable even in the rural environment, observed the changes on the property with analytical eyes during the tour his son offered. "Impressive," commented the patriarch as they walked through the new seedling greenhouse. "You've transformed this place." Blake smiled without the cynicism that previously characterized his expressions. "The place transformed me first." Seated on the porch of the main house, sharing a bottle of wine produced at a neighboring vineyard, father and son conversed with an unprecedented openness between them. "The board has been asking about you," commented Gregory, studying the ruby liquid in his glass. "They're considering your return." Blake observed the horizon, the mountains softened by the golden light of late afternoon, before responding, "I'm not certain I want to return, Dad." Gregory raised his eyebrows, surprised. "I thought that was always the plan, your redemption, your triumphant return." "Perhaps redemption isn't about returning to what I was, but becoming something completely different," replied Blake, with a tranquility that impressed his father. After Gregory's departure, Blake remained on the porch, reflecting. The email exchanges with Melissa had become more frequent in recent months. What had begun as occasional updates about Thunder had evolved into broader conversations about her work with equine therapy and his projects on the farm. An unexpected connection built upon the ashes of a disastrous beginning. In her last message, Melissa had mentioned she was considering expanding the equine therapy program, but needed partners with adequate space. Blake looked at the open fields of the farm, an idea forming in his mind. 2. Months later, a convoy of vehicles climbed the dirt road to Willow Creek Farm. Blake waited at the entrance, a mixture of anxiety and expectation accelerating his heart. The first car stopped, and Melissa got out, her now shorter hair framing a face that smiled with caution. "Welcome to Willow Creek," he greeted, extending his hand. She hesitated only for a second before accepting it. "It's more beautiful than the photos showed." Behind her, Arthur was getting out of the car, his gaze evaluating Blake with the same intensity as their first meeting, but now without the initial hostility. "The air here is good for horses," commented the old handler, as if testing Blake's reaction. "And for people too," he replied with a genuine smile. "Come, I want to show you the facilities we've prepared." During the previous weeks, Blake had personally supervised the adaptation of an area of the farm to receive the equine therapy program. Stables were renovated, training areas prepared, and simple but comfortable accommodations built to receive the team and, eventually, families of the children who would participate in the program. Melissa walked beside Blake, observing everything with the critical eyes of an expert, occasionally asking technical questions that he answered with a knowledge that surprised her. "You really studied this," she commented, when he explained the special drainage system of the stalls. "I learned that when you truly care about something, studying stops being an obligation and becomes a pleasure," he replied, without a trace of the arrogance that once defined his personality. While Melissa's technical team finalized the inspection of the facilities, Blake invited her to see his favorite place on the farm, a natural viewpoint at the top of a hill from where one could see the entire property. The path was steep but rewarding. When they reached the top, Melissa gasped, admiring the panoramic view. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that reflected on the pastures and the small lake at the center of the property. "It's breathtaking," she commented, sitting on a fallen log that served as a natural bench. Blake remained standing, hands in his pockets, observing not just the landscape, but the woman before him. There was so much history between them, so many harsh words, so many judgments, most of them justified. "I never imagined I would be here," he said finally, "neither geographically nor existentially." Melissa smiled slightly, a gesture more relaxed than any other he had ever seen on her face. If someone had told me a year ago that I would be considering a partnership with Blake Thompson, I would have questioned their sanity. A comfortable silence established itself between them, filled only by the song of birds returning to their nests and the whisper of the breeze among the leaves. "How is Thunder?" asked Blake, finally addressing the subject that hovered between them. "Anxious for the trip," she replied, her eyes shining when speaking of the animal. "He senses when something new is about to happen, has a sixth sense." Blake swallowed hard, the next question difficult to formulate. "Is he coming tomorrow with the other horses?" Melissa nodded, studying his reaction. "Yes, he's our best four-legged therapist. The children adore him." Blake looked away, fixing his gaze on the horizon where the sun was now just a golden line. "I'm afraid of his reaction when he sees me," he confessed, with a vulnerability that would have been unthinkable in the old Blake. "I don't want to traumatize him again." Melissa stood up, approaching. Horses have long memories, it's true, but they also have an incredible capacity to forgive when treated with respect and kindness. She paused, choosing her next words. "It's not so different from people in the end." The look they exchanged contained much more than words could express. A truce, perhaps, or the beginning of something that neither dared to name yet. The next day, Blake observed from a distance the arrival of the trailers transporting the horses. His heart accelerated when he saw Melissa guiding Thunder out of the last vehicle. The magnificent black animal seemed even more impressive than in his memories, moving with majestic grace as he cautiously explored the new environment. Melissa looked around, locating Blake, and made a subtle gesture for him to approach. He hesitated, the fear evident in his eyes, but began to walk slowly toward them. A few meters away, he stopped. Thunder raised his head, ears pointed in his direction, intelligent eyes fixed on his face. For a moment that seemed eternal, man and animal stared at each other, a painful past floating between them. "Talk to him," Melissa gently encouraged. "He's listening." 6 months had passed since the beginning of the equine therapy program at Willow Creek Farm. What had begun as an uncertain experiment had transformed into a success that exceeded all expectations. Families from various parts of the United States brought their children for therapeutic sessions, and the results were remarkable. Children who rarely communicated began to speak. Young people with motor difficulties gained confidence and coordination, and smiles appeared on faces where frustration had previously predominated. On a sunny Saturday morning, Blake observed from the paddock fence as Melissa conducted a session with Michael, an 8-year-old boy with autism who, just a few weeks ago, could barely maintain eye contact. Now mounted on Thunder, the boy smiled and chatted animatedly, his small hands caressing the horse's mane with genuine affection. "He told me he wants to be a veterinarian when he grows up," commented Mrs. Ellen, positioning herself beside Blake at the fence. "Because of Dr. Sanders and Thunder." Blake smiled, feeling that still strange emotion that frequently came over him in recent months. Genuine pride, not for personal achievements, but for the good he had helped create. "Michael arrived here without speaking to anyone," he remembered. "Now he doesn't stop telling stories." The cell phone in his pocket vibrated. It was a message from his father confirming his visit for the next day. Gregory came monthly to the farm, not just to check on financial aspects, but to follow his son's continuous transformation. The relationship between them, previously based only on expectations and disappointments, now flourished on more solid ground, mutual respect. At the end of the session, Melissa helped Michael dismount, and the boy ran to his mother, enthusiastically, talking about the experience. Thunder approached the fence where Blake was standing, an approach that still surprised everyone who knew the story. In the first days after Thunder's arrival at the farm, the animal had kept his distance from Blake, reacting nervously to his presence. The memory of past trauma was evident in his distrustful eyes. Blake had respected that space, never forcing an approach, just being present in daily routines, observing, learning, demonstrating with actions what words could never express. The change had begun gradually. First, Thunder allowed Blake to be in the same environment without showing agitation. Then he accepted food from his hands. And then, on a rainy morning, when Blake was working alone in the stable, the horse had approached spontaneously, touching his shoulder with his muzzle, in a gesture that made tears roll down the face of the once so arrogant man. Now Blake extended his hand over the fence, and Thunder brought his muzzle closer, allowing the touch. Melissa observed the scene with a soft smile. "It still impresses me how you two rebuilt this relationship," she commented, approaching. "He's the one who did all the hard work," replied Blake, caressing the animal's strong neck. "I just had to prove I had changed." Later, as they walked together through the property, checking the new facilities under construction to expand the program, Melissa and Blake discussed the next steps of the project. "I received an invitation to present our results at an international conference on assisted therapies," she said, as they skirted the small lake on the farm. "It's an incredible opportunity for visibility." "That's wonderful," exclaimed Blake, genuinely enthusiastic. "I'll ensure you have everything you need for the presentation." Melissa stopped, looking at him intensely. "Actually, I'd like you to present with me. This achievement is ours, Blake. Your vision for this place, combined with our experience in equine therapy, created something unique." He hesitated, surprised by the invitation. "Are you sure? My name still isn't exactly well regarded in certain circles." "People need to see that real changes are possible," she replied with conviction. "Our story, Thunder's story, all of this shows that even after the worst mistakes, there can be redemption." That word, redemption, hung between them like a promise. Blake felt the weight of everything they had lived through since that first meeting at the stables, when he was just an arrogant playboy in search of another trophy. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you," he said, his voice lower, "for not giving up, on Thunder and on me." Melissa smiled, that smile that he initially rarely saw but which now frequently illuminated his days. "You did the difficult work, Blake. I just gave the initial push." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with golden tones that reflected on the waters of the lake. On the nearby hill, horses grazed peacefully, among them Thunder, his black silhouette standing out against the orange horizon. "You know what impresses me most?" commented Melissa, observing the bucolic scene. "How everything could have been different. If you hadn't bought Thunder, if he hadn't gone through the accident, if you hadn't accepted your father's proposal to come here, so many small decisions that brought us to this exact moment." Blake reflected on chance and choices, destiny and free will, themes that would never have occupied his thoughts in the past. "I think everything happens for a reason," he finally replied. "Even the most painful mistakes. They teach us the lessons we need to learn if we have the courage to face them." Melissa looked at him with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Who would have thought that Blake Thompson would become a philosopher? They laughed together, a free and genuine sound that echoed across the property. At some point, without exactly noticing when, their hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had always belonged in that perfect fit. The stable lights were beginning to be turned on for the night routine. Soon it would be time for the community dinner, where employees, volunteers, and participating families would share stories and laughter. A new tradition of Willow Creek Farm, now not just an enterprise, but a community. "What do you think the future holds for us?" asked Melissa as they walked back to the main house, still holding hands. Blake looked at her, then at the horizon where Thunder now galloped freely, and finally at their united hands, a simple gesture that symbolized an extraordinary journey. Of transformation. I don't know exactly, he answered with honesty. But for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid to find out. And as the sun completely disappeared behind the Kentucky mountains, taking with it another day and announcing the promise of a new dawn, Blake Thompson finally understood what his grandfather had tried to teach him so many years ago. True wealth isn't in what we possess, but in what we become. And he, who had once believed that everything could be bought, had found something that no fortune could acquire. The chance to start over, to be better, to build something meaningful. The chance for redemption. Thunder in the distance neighed as if in agreement, his sound echoing across the hills like a melody celebrating freedom, his, Blake's, and that of all those whose lives had been touched by the extraordinary journey that had begun with a mistake, but culminated in something so much greater and more meaningful than any of them could have imagined.